I grew up in India, and I feel very fortunate. I've had some very strong female role models in my life. Both my grandmothers knew Gandhi and Nehru very well, to the extent that one of them actually charged across India on the train to scold him for accepting partition. And charging anywhere in India on a train is not an easy matter. They tend to meander along a little bit. And what's interesting about this is that in India, while it's a fairly patriarchal society, at the functional level, at the family level, there's actually a matriarchy. The head of every family is always the oldest woman. And that polarity and that duality makes society work there. And I want to use that to try and talk about what's happening today. I've titled this talk, Occupy Male Street. And I think there's a fundamental, fairly seismic societal shift happening that we don't fully understand. When I look at these pictures, I'm wondering, why has the response been so extreme? Why the extreme response? Seems utterly disproportionate to what's going on down there. So with your permission, I'd like to use this polarity to explore this. Now, I want to explain, what do I mean by male and female, first of all. I do not mean gender relations. I mean the characteristics that we'd associate with a male archetype or a female archetype. So with a male archetype, you have aggressive, hierarchical, top-down, winner-take-all, etc. And the female archetype would be teamwork, nurturing, participatory, decentralized. Yin versus yang. I may drop into gender now and then, but in general, I'm trying to stay at this archetypal level so that we can talk about this. And I think I'm going to try and make sense of what's going on with this. This is the oldest duality in life. And that tension between these two poles is how life has evolved since the beginning of time. And you need that tension to play that string. And to fully torture the metaphor, the song would be evolution. And if you don't have the tension, you can't really do much. And they have to stay in balance. Right? Now, we've used that duality in our civilization to progress ourselves. We had tribal and village life, which was largely female in the gathering state. With the rise and centralization of agriculture, we developed feudal systems which were very male, top-down, centralized, always a man at the top. Christian religions, Judeo-Christian religions rose after that, again, very male. Then the Renaissance came along, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and opened it up again, and used a female type of archetype to open it up and take us to the next level. The last couple of hundred years, we've had the Industrial Revolution and capitalism push us to unprecedented progress, right? And those are, again, very male archetypes. And it's left us with a legacy today of very male societal constructs. The capitalism is the obvious one, Judeo-Christian religions, the military-industrial complex is probably the epitome of all of this. Now, the counterbalance and counterweight to all of this is our civics. If you think about our democracy or socialism, it's participatory, it's consensus-driven, it's nurturing. We have social security, we have welfare, we have unemployment, all trying to balance out and act as the counterweight to what's going on over there, all the progress. Right? And typically what happens is the male archetype is what's pushing us forward aggressively into new areas, taking huge risks, and the female archetype holds the relationships, consolidates progress, and manages the world. There are two things that are happening that make this a very unique point in time that I think concern me a great deal. The first is we're in a world of very fast-moving technologies. I've had the extraordinary privilege of helping build out Singularity University these last 3 years. And we have a set of technologies today, AI, robotics, biotech, nanotech, medicine, computing, energy. And aspects of these technologies are all doubling in their price performance anywhere from 18 to 25 months. And it's pushing us into unprecedented areas, and I think it's going to disrupt almost every aspect of life as we know it. If you look at the rise of the internet, it's completely disrupted, say, the journalism or the media industry, which used to be very centralized, top-down, and it's now collaborative filtering at the edges, social filtering, participatory, and so on, right? Crowdsourced. So this dynamic is pushing us forward extraordinarily, and our balancing factors also have to augment and expand correspondingly to provide the appropriate counterweight. The second major thing that's happening is, as a result of these technologies, we're achieving abundance. Peter Diamandis, our chairman and co-founder, and Stephen Kotler are just releasing a book called Abundance. And they're showing how these technologies will bring us a great deal of abundance, potentially, very quickly, in healthcare, education, energy, clean water. Now, when you have abundance, you need a female archetype to manage it all. Right? Today, we have an abundance of information on the internet. And we use a participatory, decentralized linking structure to manage that. The male archetype, when it meets abundance, hoards it and carves it up. Right? And it relates to that abundance as power. I have more of this, and therefore I have more power. There's a great biological precedence for this. E.O. Wilson writes this extraordinary book called The Superorganism, and he shows that fire ants, which in their native habitat of Central America, rip each other to shreds, incredible aggression between hives, nonstop. Look at the picture on the top right. Nonstop, uncontained war and aggression. When they got to the US by accident, they found no competition. And their genetic structure changed. They changed their genetic structure to operate on a win-win cooperative basis. And in the US, they don't fight each other. And they've spread across the entire country as a result, with unprecedented, frightening speed. Right? Now, we're the epitome of our male structure today is probably Wall Street and what's happening there, right? And note that the hoarding and carving up of value there. Again, the male structure, meeting abundance, uses greed and aggression in this. And we haven't figured out what the ants have figured out yet. This is causing extraordinary stress. And the analogy I've come up with is it's like the male archetype has gone out, binged on the weekly paycheck, and come back and said, no money for education, healthcare, food, housing. The Arab Spring is one manifestation of this stress. There they're fighting against the old feudal structures. Again, you've got feudal Middle Eastern structures hoarding the oil, not sharing it around appropriately. And we've put the world under extreme stress as a result of this. And let's talk about stress for a minute. The conventional wisdom about stress is that when stressed, the human being will go into the fight or flight response, right? And that's been the conventional wisdom for several decades. Researchers at UCLA just went and looked back and looked at this carefully. And they found that the participants in all of those studies where they reached these conclusions, the participants were mostly men. So they said, wonder if women do the same thing. So they redid the studies with women and found that women don't go into a fight or flight response. Women go into a response called tend and befriend. They go into a nurturing mode. Very, very different response to stress. And it makes sense. It makes sense once you hear it. Now, we're seeing the rise of some strong female archetypal structures in the world today. Burning Man, with its gifting economy. The DIY movement and the Maker Faire movement are all examples of this. The open source movement is quintessentially female in its infrastructure. The internet is the latest big example of that. Note, by the way, the internet in this participatory model is trying to be shut down with the SOPA bill that's in Congress today. Right? So the male power structures are fundamentally threatened. I think that's fundamentally what's going on. And so there's some great examples of this female archetype that are popping up. And to drop to some specific examples, we have a lot of that kind of DNA in our organization. Emmeline and Susan, Sarah Sklarczyk, who helped me a little bit with this talk, is brighter than half of us in this room put together. Catherine Maronic, who helps us with all our research. Sonia Arison is writing a very important book on the societal implications of longevity. And we study the social implications of these fast-moving technologies and where they might take us. M.M. Andrews from Nigeria was our class speaker last summer. Lost probably about a third of her family to AIDS. Going way back into my childhood, this is Jinxa Kerkar, who was a World War II Holocaust survivor, showed up in India, found the schooling was terrible, started a Montessori school, and has been a veritable godmother to many Indian generations. Nicole Dreisky is looking at how do you use rich media and transform children's education so that whenever children interact a screen, they bring higher order thinking to it. Right? Dr. Margaret Martin just won the Presidential Award for extraordinary work at the Harmony Project, where they give classical music instruments to kids 150% below the poverty line. I'm on the board of Breakthrough, which was founded by Malika Datta. And they use rich media to transform civics and transform the cultural conversation. They ran a campaign in India called Ring the Bell. So if you hear domestic violence, you go and ring the doorbell. Reached 140 million people around India. Unbelievable outcome. Again, leveraging that capability. We've just recently seen Lema Bowie win the Nobel Peace Prize for going on a sex strike. She rallied all the women in Liberia together. They're sick of the 14-year civil war. They called it praying for peace. And of course, if you're praying, and completely dissolved the war. Very, very deserved Nobel Peace Prize, right? And Hillary Clinton, in a unique approach to Libya, got everybody around the table and talked about it, reached consensus before taking action. Contrast that to our very male approach in what we did in Iraq, right? What was the phrase, we'll bomb them to the last century? This is Kiddis, who's one of our alumni from last summer. She's doing her PhD at the University of Houston in pure mathematics. And she hails from the villages of Ethiopia. And I said to her, how do you get into pure mathematics from Ethiopia? And when did you get interested in this? And she said, when I was 5, all I saw was the government was corrupt and people were lying to each other, and maths and physics was where reality lived, and that's what I wanted to study. But they wouldn't let me into school because school didn't start till 7 years old. So I said, well, what did you do? And this little 5-year-old girl wanted to go to school so badly, she took a rock and she knocked out some of her teeth so she looked older. Okay? And I have a couple of suggestions around what we can do as a society around this. The obvious ones are providing education for the folks like Kiddist. And we found that fully educated girls and women provide that counterbalance to the male culture. The second is obviously support women in commerce, and we'll do as much as we can around that. The third is a little bit more subtle. In a patriarchal society like India or China and the Middle East, we have this terrible problem where we spoil our sons. Daughters are treated terribly to the point of infanticide sometimes. The sons grow up emotionally immature, dysfunctional, unable to really deal maturely with what's going on. They then marry women who then spoil their sons. And I think you could take out a large chunk of gender issues by just not spoiling your sons. The Scandinavians have figured this out. And rising back to the archetypal level for a second. So when I bring this perspective to what's happening on Occupy Wall Street, what I'm seeing is the female archetype around the world is under extreme stress. Right? What's happening there is they're tending and befriending. They're criticized for not having an agenda. Again, that's the male response. And what's the response on our side? We're pepper spraying our civics. So what's happened here? This is supposed to be a representative democracy. It is, but it's not representing the people. It's representing the old power structures and the money. You buy an election today. If you don't spend enough money, you don't get elected. And the male counterpart, the old male archetypes, again, I'm talking about the male archetypes. If I have it right, that attack was actually ordered by a woman. So I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about the male archetype in our societal structures. The male archetype has completely overtaken our civics today. Again, referring back to the SOPA bill, which is trying to cram down and have ownership and control and domination over what happens on the internet. And we have to fight that. And we have to fight it for a couple of very important reasons. And this point in time is very unique in history. How we manage the next couple of decades will dictate how the next 2 or 3 centuries unfolds for humanity. For the reasons that A, we have technology accelerating at an unprecedented rate. A couple of 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, the last time these types of seismic societal shifts happened, if one polarity went a little bit off the rails, it didn't really matter that much. There wasn't that much harm they could do. But today, with nuclear weapons, biological weapons, a globalized financial system, the impact and potential disaster if one polarity goes way off the rails is actually an existential threat. So I think we need to figure out how to support the female archetypal constructs in society and embed them. We don't have that in our social or economic structure, and it's not benefiting our culture today in a way that's helpful. So I call on all of us to rise up, support those female archetypal structures, and occupy Mail Street. Thank you.